The spring at San Carlos had failed by the moon of many leaves, and after that there was nothing to do but count the dead and wait to become one of them. Tithes. The people rendered it Cottonwood, for the tree that grows only where there is water, the tree that promises a spring even in the worst country, sat in the Ramada's thin shade at the hottest hour and watched the heat stand up off the flat, white ground in sheets. And she did the arithmetic she had been doing every day for a month, and it came out the same. There was a cup of mesquite meal left. There was a little dried mule, gone rank. There was no water but the agency water, and the agency water came from the river the whites
had let the miners foul upstream, and it moved something loose and burning through the bowels of the children, and the children who drank it thinned, and the thin ones died, and they died so quietly that a mother could sit holding one and not know the moment it happened. They called this place Hell's 40 Acres. Even the soldiers called it that, and the soldiers had built it.
It was the flat bottom land where no Apache would ever have chosen to summer, chosen precisely because no one would choose it, chosen because a people pinned on ground that wanted to kill them was a people too busy dying to run. The mountains stood all around it, blue and cool and full of game and clean water, the old country close enough to ache, and a line drawn on a map said the people could not go there. And soldiers with rifles said the same, and so the mountains only stood there, being cool and green and forbidden, while the people baked on the flat and drank the poison river and died. Cottonwood was 29 summers old. She felt older than the mountains. Behind her, in the wickiup made of whatever could be scavenged, her 2 children lay in the killing afternoon. Chi, the boy, was 10. They had named him for the red of his cheeks when he was a fat, laughing baby in a green year. And there was nothing red or fat about him now. He was all elbows and enormous eyes, and a stillness that had come into him the day his father was taken. Dolly the girl was 5, named for the bluebird, and she still, on the good days, when there had been water and a little food, made a small warbling sound in her sleep that broke her mother's heart clean across every single time, because Cottonwood did not know how many more such sounds there would be. Their father was 3 months gone. Not dead, worse than dead, in the particular way the agency had made an art of. He had been named a renegade for the crime of walking 2 days into the mountains to hunt when the rations failed, hunt so his children could eat, and the soldiers had taken him and a dozen others and put them on a train, chained to a fever prison in a wet green country 1,000 miles east called Florida, where Apaches went and did not come back, where the wet air filled a desert man's lungs with water until he drowned standing up. She would never see him again. She knew it the way she knew the heat. He had looked at her over the shoulder of the soldier who was chaining him, one look, and in it was the whole of what could not be said, and then he was gone. And she had 2 children and a cup of meal and a poison river, and she had made him a promise with her eyes that she would keep them alive, and she meant to keep it if it cost her every last thing she was. That was the first thing. The second thing came at the dark of that moon, and it was worse. Word ran through the camp the way water runs through sand, quick and quiet and gone before you could hold it. The contractor who supplied the beef, the fat man of the Indian ring, the network of thieves who grew rich, selling the government rotten food at the price of good and pocketing the difference over the bodies of the penned had a new arrangement. There was money now in renegades. Not just the beef. The territory would pay a bounty for every reservation Apache brought in from off the line, dead or living, and there were men, hard men, scalp men left over from the Mexican bounty days when a state had paid in silver for Apache hair and had not always looked close at whether the hair was Apache or only dark. Those men were riding again because the bounty had made it worth their while, and the agency did not look too hard at how its rolls thinned so long as they thinned, because a dead Apache off the books was money in a contractor's pocket, and one less mouth to pretend to feed. They were, Cottonwood understood, going to be killed either way. Slowly, on the flat, by the water and the hunger, or quickly, if they ran, by the men with the long knives. The line on the map was not a fence to keep them safe. It was the edge of a trap, and the trap had teeth on both sides. She went to the old woman, her eyes are open, who was the last who remembered the free years whole, and she sat with her in the dark and said the thing plainly, because there was no time for anything but plainness. "I am going to run with the children. I would rather they die in the cool mountains with clean water on their tongues than on this flat drinking the yellow river. And I have heard a thing. Tell me if it is true, or if it is a dream. People tell to keep from despair." The old woman's eyes moved in the dark. "Tell me the thing you have heard. That there is a spring?" West and north, past the Malpays, past the Black Rock, up under the rim where no cattle can climb and no wagon can follow, a green place. A man lives there, a man who catches the wild horses and gentles them and sells them, and who lives alone, and who lets no one drive him off, and who has never once turned a running person over to the soldiers or the scalp men. She paused. "They say he is one of us and not one of us. Chij, they call him Chij, or the whites call him Rafe. His mother was Chiricahua of the Warm Springs people. His father was a white freighter who left. He belongs to no one. They say he scouted for the soldiers once, in the bad time, and did a thing so terrible he can never come home to the people, and can never be a white man either, and so he lives at the spring between the two worlds with his horses, and wants nothing and fears nothing, because a man who belongs nowhere has nowhere left to be afraid of losing." Her eyes are open was quiet a long time. "I knew his mother," she said at last. "Before she was a good woman, what her son did—" She stopped. "It is true what they say he did. And it is true that he has never given a running person to the knife. Both are true. A man can be both. Most men are." She reached out and found Cottonwood's hand in the dark and held it hard with the terrible strength the very old sometimes keep. "The spring is real. The water is real. Whether the man will let you drink of it, that I cannot tell you. But there is no water on the flat, and there are knives on the line, and there is water at the spring, so—" She let the hand go. "Go to the water. Everything alive goes to the water in the end. Go and take the little bluebird's laugh out of this place while she still has one." Cottonwood ran in the black hours before the moon in the way of her people, which is the way of the desert itself, moving in the cool dark. Lying up in shade through the killing day, she took a gourd of water and the last of the meal, and a knife, and her grandmother's fire drill and the awl, and she took the children, and she went out through the place in the line she had watched for weeks, where the sentry drowsed, and she did not look back at Hell's 40 acres, because there was nothing behind her now but the poison river and the graves. She stopped once at the edge of the flat, where the good ground began to rise toward the black Malpais, and she knelt and pressed her palm to the earth, and it was still warm from the day, though the sun was hours down, warm the way a fevered child is warm, and she said low to her husband 1,000 miles east in the drowning green, "I am doing it. I am taking them to the water. Watch me do it." And then she turned her face to the black shape of the mountains and the country beyond, and she began to walk, and the two children walked and were carried and walked, and the desert opened around them, enormous and silver and pitiless and beautiful, and swallowed them whole. A man who lives alone at a spring in that country lives there for a reason, and among such men the reasons are never small ones. Everyone who spoke of Chiz, Rafe, agreed he was dangerous and disagreed about all the rest. Some said he had scouted Apaches for General Crook in the hard years and had guided the Bluecoats to a sleeping camp that was then cut to pieces at dawn, women and old ones and children among the dead, and that when he understood what he had done he had thrown his scout's coat in the fire and ridden out and never taken pay from any man's army again. Some said the camp he had betrayed held his own mother's people, his own blood, and that this was the thing he carried. Some said he did not carry it at all, that he was cold clear through, a man who had chosen the winning side and only left it when it stopped paying. They said he had killed men who came to his spring, meaning to take it. They said he traded fair and spoke little and drank less than a man with his history had any right to. They said he was half a ghost and that the living tired him. Most of it was closer to true than the men who said it knew, and all of it missed the size of the wound, which was this, that he had done the unforgivable thing young out of a young man's hunger to belong somewhere, to be useful, to be a someone to the powerful men who had never before looked at a half-breed orphan twice, and that the belonging he had bought with it had turned to ash in the same hour he earned it. And he had lived every day since in the exact center of two worlds, welcome in neither, judge and jailer of himself, and had decided that the only honest place left for such a man was alone, at a spring, being of use to the horses, who did not know what he had done and would not have cared, and who forgave a man simply by letting him near. The desert nearly finished what the agency had started. The first night was only walking. The second night the water ran low, and Cottonwood gave hers to the children and told them she was not thirsty, which was the oldest lie and the kindest, and the boy looked at her over the gourd with his father's steady eyes, and did not believe her, and drank anyway, because he had learned that some lies are gifts. The third day the wind came. Not the clean wind, but the desert's killing wind, the one that lifts the world into the air, and the sky went the color of a wound, and then of nothing, and the dust closed over them like water closing over the drowned, and Cottonwood wrapped the children's faces and her own, and navigated by the wind alone, keeping it on the same burning quarter of her cheek, hour after hour, because to stop was to be buried, and to turn was to die. And it was in the last of that storm, blind and staggering, the gourd long dry, the little girl gone alarmingly quiet, and light in her arms, quiet the way the dying go quiet, past thirst, past crying, the body giving up its water, and then giving up, that Cottonwood understood she had failed. She was not going to reach the spring. She had run them out of the trap only to die in the open, which was, she thought, with the strange flat clarity of the end, at least a death of her own choosing, in the cool of a storm, off the flat, off the poison river, and she went down on her knees in the blowing dark with the boy's hand in hers and the girl against her chest, and she bent herself over both of them to be the last shelter she had left to give, her own body. And she waited. She did not hear the horse. No one hears anything in that wind. She only felt suddenly a great warmth at her back, a wall of it and a shadow bulking between her and the storm, and then a man's hands, enormous, careful, and a voice close to her ear, rough, speaking the old tongue, her tongue, the words coming from a place she had not expected ever to hear them again. "I have you, I have you. There is water. Get up if you can."
"If you can't, I'll carry the little ones and come back for you, but I would rather not leave you. So, get up."
She got up. She would never afterward be able to say how. The man had put the girl inside his own coat against his own body and had the boy up before him on a big dun horse that stood with its haunches to the storm and its head down, patient as the rock. And he half lifted, half dragged Cottonwood up behind, and he turned the horse. She understood only later that he had come out into the storm looking for them, that he had seen them cross the Malpays at dusk from his high place, and had reckoned the storm and reckoned they would not make it, and had ridden out to find 3 strangers dying in the dark, 3 of the running people, the very kind of people that bringing in would have made him rich, and he brought them up out of the killing open and into a cleft in the black rock and then through it, and then, impossibly, into green. The spring was a small miracle, and it looked like the first day of the world. Water came up clear and cold out of the living rock into a stone basin some patient hand had shaped, and ran off down a little green throat of a canyon thick with cottonwood and willow and grass, walled on every side by cliffs no cow could climb and no wagon could follow, a hidden green wound in the red and black country, invisible until you were inside it. There was a low house built half into the rock and pole corrals, and horses, 12, 2 dozen, lifting their heads in the last blowing edge of the storm. He got the children down, and he did the thing that told her more about him than a year of talk would have. He did not give them the water. He knew better. He wet a cloth and let them suck at it a little and then a little more, the way you bring the near-dead back from thirst, slow, because water too fast to a dried body is its own kind of killing, and he watched the little girl until the girl's eyes cleared and found her mother, and the small, warbling breath came back into her, and only then did something in the man's shoulders ease by a fraction. "They'll do," he said. He looked at Cottonwood. In the lamplight his face was the map of the whole borderland, the bones of her own people, the pale eyes of somewhere else, weathered dark, hard, and behind the hardness something that had been holding very still for a very long time. You crossed the Malpays on foot with these two, in this. It was not a question, and it was not praise. It was a man revising against his will an estimate. "There was no water on the flat," she said when she could speak. "And there are knives on the line. There is water here. Everything alive goes to the water." Something moved far back in his eyes. Perhaps it was the old woman's very words, come to him across the desert out of a stranger's mouth. He looked away. "I am not begging," she said then, because it was the one thing she had left that was hers, and she said it though she was lying on his floor with his water on her cracked lips. "I have work in my hands. I can tan, I can sew, I can find water and food in country that looks empty. I know the plants that heal and the ones that kill. I can keep this place. I'm asking for the summer. Only until the rains, until the mountains are safe, until I can take them north to the free people across the border in the Sierra Madre. Then we go. In the meantime, I earn every mouthful. I will not be a debt to any man." The man was quiet a long time. The spring made its small eternal sound in the dark. At last he said, in the old tongue, roughly as though the words cost him, "You don't have to earn the water. Nobody earns water. That's not what water is." He stood. "But there's work, and hands are welcome, and I won't say otherwise." He went to the door and stood looking out at the last of the storm scouring itself away to stars. "You can stay till the rains, longer if it comes to that. Nobody's driven off this spring that didn't come to drive me off it." He did not turn around, "and nobody here is going to be given to the knife or the soldiers, not while I stand up."
"You can sleep on that, whatever else you've heard about me on the way." A pause. "You'll have heard plenty. Most of it's true."
"Sleep anyway." And that was the first night, and none of them slept but the children, who slept the deep-drugged sleep of the watered and the safe, and Cottonwood lay listening to the strange man breathe across the little house and kept her knife near, not because she had decided to fear him, but because trust was a thing she no longer gave on the strength of a single mercy. And near dawn she heard him rise without a sound and go out to the horses, and she heard the horses greet him low, and she understood that whatever this man was, the danger in him was not turned toward her and never would be. It was turned every hour of his life on himself. They did not become anything all at once. Those who tell such stories afterward like to say a hard season melts strangers into family, that need becomes love. But it is slower than that and stranger, and it is made of 10,000 small wordless things, and it can go either way for a long time before it sets. She learned him the way you learn weather. She learned that he rose before light and worked the horses in the cool, and that with the horses he was another man entirely, patient past belief, gentle, murmuring, a man who never broke a horse but gentled one, who would sit a whole morning in a corral, simply letting a wild thing get used to the shape of him, asking nothing, until the wild thing chose itself to come. She thought that is the only way he knows how to be loved, to sit very still and ask nothing and wait to be chosen. And whoever chose him, not the whites, not the people, only the horses. She learned that he could go a whole day and speak 9 words. She learned that he ate what she cooked and said nothing but ate all of it, and that once she caught him at the door with his eyes shut and his face turned to the smell of the pot, looking like a man remembering a house he had lived in once, long ago, in some green year, and she learned the shape of his wound, though it was deep into the summer before he ever spoke of it. It was the boy who found the edge of it, the way children find the true thing without knowing they are looking. Chi had been drawn to the horses from the first hour, the way a starved thing is drawn to food, and Rafe had let him near, the way he let everything near without seeming to, and one evening the boy, thawing now, turning back toward being a boy, asked in the old tongue, watching Rafe's hands on a young mare, "Where did you learn this? Who taught you?" And the man's hands went still on the mare. "My mother's brother," he said after a while, "when I was younger than you." He did not say more, but that night he did not eat, and he walked out to the far end of the green canyon and stood alone under the cliffs for a long time in the dark, and when he came back his face was closed again. But Cottonwood had seen, and she began to understand, that everything the man loved he had lost or betrayed, and that the horses were the one thing left he could love without the loving turning to ruin in his hands, and that a boy who wanted to learn the horses was walking straight into the middle of the man's whole grief without knowing it. The girl thawed fastest, the way the small ones do. Dolly was 5, and grief and fear could not hold her against the pull of green grass and cold water, and above all, the dog, a rangy, desert-colored brute that had frightened her at first and within a week was letting her sleep against its ribs in the shade. She followed Rafe at a distance, silent as her namesake bird, and he pretended not to notice her. And one morning Cottonwood looked out and saw the big, scarred man crouched at the spring with the little girl beside him, his enormous hands cupping water and showing her small ones how to drink from the living rock without muddying it. And neither of them was speaking, the man because he had no words for children, and the child because she had learned in hell's 40 acres to be silent, and the two silences sat side by side at the water and were for that moment a kind of peace. The boy took longer, the way the boy always does. Chi had made himself the man of his family too young, had watched his father chained onto a train, had decided somewhere in that hour that it fell to him now, and he watched Rafe with a wary, aching, jealous hunger, wanting to be taught, furious at the wanting, ashamed that they had needed a stranger at all, feeling it as a verdict on his own smallness, though no 10-year-old should ever have carried such a thing. He worked himself past exhaustion, hauling water and cutting grass, and would not admit tiredness. It was Rafe who broke it in his own slow way. One morning he did not send the boy to haul water. Instead he put a rope in his hands, and he said, in the old tongue, "A man should know how to bring a wild thing to trust him. It's the hardest thing there is. Harder than shooting, harder than fighting, and there's no forcing in it. The second you force, you've lost, and you start over. You mind me exact, and I'll teach you." And he taught him, hour on hour, more patient with the boy than Cottonwood would have guessed the man had patience for. And the day the wild young mare at last walked across the corral of her own will and put her nose against the boy's chest and chose him, Chi turned to find Rafe watching, and his face was doing something he could not control, and Rafe did not smile or praise him. He only nodded once, and the boy carried that single nod around inside him for a week like a coal that would not go cold. The summer deepened, and the drought deepened with it. The world beyond the green canyon went to bone and ash. The sun was a white nail driven into a white sky. The far basins shimmered and lied about lakes that were not there. But the spring did not fail. It never failed, Rafe said. It came from the deep rock, from snow that had fallen on the rim in some winter before any of them were born and had been finding its slow way down through the stone ever since, so that to drink of it was to drink a season that had died 100 years ago and been saved in the dark. Cottonwood thought that was as near to a holy thing as she had heard a man say, and she saw that he didn't know he had said it. She learned that he was fair, which surprised her. He shared the meat even and gave the children the best of it. He never raised his voice, not to her, not to the children, not to the horses, not even to the dog, and she came to understand that the danger the desert whispered about him was real, but that it pointed always inward, that he was a man holding something at bay with the whole of his strength, and that their coming had shifted the balance of that long private war, had given him, for the first time in years, a reason to rise that was not merely the animal habit of not yet being dead. One night the little girl woke screaming from a dream of the flat of the Yellow River, of her father going away on the iron road, and she could not be reached, thrashing in a terror too large for her small body. Cottonwood held her and could not quiet her, and then the big man was there in the dark, awkward, enormous, kneeling by them, and he did the only thing he knew. He began, low and rough and badly, to sing. It was an Apache song, his mother's song, a song for quieting children worn smooth by 100 years of mothers, and his voice was uncertain, reaching for something it had not touched in a lifetime. A grown man saying words he had last heard as a child before everything was lost, and the girl quieted against it and slept. And Rafe stayed there on his knees a while on the stone floor, and Cottonwood saw that his face was wet, and she looked away to give him the privacy of it, and neither of them ever spoke of that night. But in the morning he brought the children the first melon he had guarded all summer against exactly such a moment, and cut it with his great knife, and gave them the heart of it. And that was the only way he had of saying the thing he could not say, and she took it the only way she had, by cooking him the best of what there was, and setting it before him without a word. It was at the height of the dry, when even the spring had dropped an inch, and the horses grew restless, and the far country burned brown to every horizon, that he finally told her. They had fallen into the way of sitting up after the children slept, not talking, only sharing the small fire and the sound of the water, and one night he looked into the coals a long time, and then he began in the old tongue roughly, and she let him, and did not look at him because she understood he could only say it to the fire. He told her about being a boy who belonged to no one. The half-breed, the breed, spat on by the whites at the fort, and looked at sideways by the people because of his father. A boy hungry his whole life, not for food, but to be wanted, to be of use to somebody, anybody. He told her how the army had found exactly that hunger, and fed it, had made him a scout, had given him a coat and a horse, and, for the first time in his life, the eyes of powerful men resting on him with something like approval, and how he had been drunk on it, on being finally someone. And he told her, flat, without mercy for himself, about the dawn, the sleeping camp in the cold canyon, the one he had found and guided them to, told himself it was a hostile camp, a fighting camp, and how it had not been, how it had been mostly women and old ones and children, how the shooting had gone on in the gray light, and he had stood on the rim above it, holding the horses, and understood too late, forever too late, what he had done and what he was, and how, when the smoke cleared, he had gone down among the dead, looking he did not know for what, and had found, among the women, A face he knew, a woman of his mother's people, a distant aunt who had once, when he was small and no one else would, fed him and called him by a kind name, dead because of him. So I burned the coat, he said, and I rode out, and there was nowhere to ride to, not to the people. I'd led the soldiers on to their own blood. There's no coming back from that, and there shouldn't be. Not to the whites. I was never one of them, and never would be, breed to the end. So I found this water that belongs to nobody, up where nobody comes, and I've been here since, with the horses, because a horse don't know what a man's done. A horse will forgive you, just for sitting still and not lying to it. He turned and looked at her at last, and there was no self-pity in it, only the plain, terrible knowledge a man lives inside. So don't make me into the one who saved you. Whatever I did out there in the storm, I've done a worse thing than you can measure, and there's no water deep enough to wash it, and I stopped looking for the water that could a long time ago. Cottonwood was quiet a long while. The fire settled. She thought of the easy things people say and set them all aside, because most of what people say at such moments is for the comfort of the one saying it. At last she said, "Her eyes are open, knew your mother. She told me before I ran. She said, the boy did the terrible thing, and the boy has never once given a running person to the knife. Both are true. A man can be both. Most men are." She looked at him. "You have led soldiers to a sleeping camp. That is true, and it is yours, and you will carry it into the ground. And you rode out into a killing storm to bring in 3 of the running people that any other man in this country would have brought in for silver. That is also true, and it is also yours. You do not get to keep only the first one because the first one is heavier and lets you go on hiding at this spring hating yourself, which is easier than the work of being the second kind of man out where people can see you do it. The dead aunt fed a hungry boy no one else would feed. If you knew her, you know what she would say to you spending your whole life at a spring paying a debt to her by helping no one but horses. She fed you. Go and feed someone. That is how the debt is paid. Not in staying dead alongside them." He did not answer, but something in him that had been clenched for a lifetime eased, and after a while he banked the fire careful and lay down, and slept, she thought, better than he had. And in the morning he took the boy out to the horses with something new in him, some spark that had only been endured before and now faintly mattered. They were not a family. But a fire has to be small before it can be large, and this one had caught. Trouble in that country did not announce itself. It came riding up out of the shimmer on grained horses, wearing good hats, smiling. The first sign came in the worst of the dry. The whole basin was dying of thirst, and a dying country is a country where water becomes the only thing worth killing for, and word had gone out. The way word does, that the breeds spring up under the rim had never failed, not once, not even now. And so they came, 5 riders led by a man named Vane. Ambrose Vane owned cattle the way the drought owned the land, completely and without mercy. He had come into the basin in the fat years and had spent the dry ones buying and bullying and fencing every spring and seep and tank for 40 miles, so that when the drought bit down, every small holder and every homestead found the water they had always used suddenly behind Vane's wire, and had to sell to Vane, cheap, or watch their stock die, and either way Vane won. He was a soft-spoken, pleasant, terrible man who had learned that pleasantness was cheaper than violence and usually did the same work. And now the only water in the basin he did not own was a spring under the rim, held by a lone breed the law would never trouble itself to protect. He rode up to the cleft, and Rafe went out to meet him and did not ask him to get down, and that too was a language. Vane talked pleasantly at length. About the drought, hard on everyone, wasn't it? about how the country was changing, how a man had to think about the future, how it grieved him to see good water going to waste on a few horses when his cattle, the basin's whole economy, the livelihoods of decent families, were dying for want of it. About how the spring had surely never been properly filed, had it, not with all the paper in order, a squatter's claim really when you came down to it, and how it would be a simple thing, a neighborly thing, to come to an arrangement, a fair price, more money than a breed horse catcher would see in 10 years. And then, still smiling, he looked past Rafe to the mouth of the house, where Cottonwood stood with the children behind her, and his pleasant face did something small and satisfied. "Now that's interesting," Vane said. "Didn't take you for a family man, Rafe." "Those are reservation Apache, or I'm a Chinaman. Runaways. There's paper on those. Wasn't the territories paying good money for renegades brought in, and better for ones brought in quiet?" He let it sit. "So here's the whole picture, friend. You sell me the water at a fair price and go your way, and I forget I ever saw a Warm Springs woman and 2 brats up here off the line. Or you don't, and I mention it to certain men who ride for the bounty, and they come up here and settle the water question and the Apache question, both in one afternoon, and nobody in this territory sheds a tear over a dead breed and 3 dead renegades at a spring. That's not a threat. I don't threaten. That's just the arithmetic." He gathered his reins, pleasant as Sunday. "You think on it. I'm a patient man, but the country's thirsty, and patience runs shallow as everything else this year." He touched his hat to Cottonwood. The courtesy was the insult, and deliberate, and he turned his horse and rode his men back down into the shimmer, unhurried, certain, the way men ride when they believe time and the drought are both on their side. That night the little house was very quiet. The children slept. Cottonwood sat across the fire from Rafe and said the thing that had sat in her chest since noon like a stone. "We will go," she said, "in the dark. Tonight, tomorrow, north to the border, to the free people in the Sierra Madre. It is early, the mountains are not yet safe, but this is worse. He will bring the scalpmen, and they will come for the water and find us, and you will die for 3 people who are not—" She stopped. "Who are not yours. You gave us the summer. There is no debt. I will not have your death on the same hands that carry my husband's face." For a long time Rafe did not answer. The spring made its small sound in the dark. Then he told her the last of it, the thing under all the other things. "When they came for that camp," he said, "there was a woman got out, ran with a child. I saw her from the rim. I could have called it, could have pointed, and a man would have ridden her down, and it would have pleased the officer, and God help me, part of me wanted to please him even then, even in the middle of it. He was quiet. I didn't point. I looked the other way and let her run. 1 woman, 1 child out of all of it. That's the only clean thing I did that whole black day. I didn't point. And it's the one thing that's let me get up in the morning since, that somewhere out there, maybe there's a woman and a grown child alive, because a breed on a rim kept his mouth shut for 1 breath. He raised his eyes to hers, and for once the well had a bottom, and something living was down there in the dark of it. "You come across the Malpayas, and you're the woman. You and that boy and that girl. You're the running woman I get to not point at, except this time I get to do more than look away. This time I get to stand up. Do you understand what that is to a man like me? You think I'm going to let you walk back out into the desert to spare me a fight? You're not the debt. You're the payment. You're the only chance I'll ever get to be, for once, the man I should have been on that rim. I am not moving, and neither are you. We'll meet whatever comes here together, because I've run clean out of tomorrow's worth saving myself for, and I'd rather spend the ones I've got left on this than on nothing at all." He did not say stay, or you are mine, though Vane had said the last for him, and he had not corrected it. He said that instead, which was more, and Cottonwood understood that they had crossed some river in the dark without either of them naming the water. The waiting that followed was its own hardship, Worse in its way than a blow, because it only sat and grew. But Rafe did with it what he had done with everything that summer. He turned it into teaching. He showed the boy the ways out of the canyon a man on foot could take that a mounted man could not, up the cracks in the cliff to the rim where one person with a rifle could hold a trail against many, and he provisioned a hidden cleft up there, quiet with water and dried meat and a robe in the days after Vane came. He taught the little girl, gently, made a game of being small and still, and silent as a stone in shadow, so the game would be in her hands, if ever the terror came, so fear would find her already holding a tool against it. He was doing for these children, Cottonwood understood, watching him, exactly what no one had done for the people in that cold canyon at dawn. He was giving them a way to not be caught, a place, a plan, a chance to run and live. And she knew it was a prayer he was making with his hands, offered up late to a dawn 20 years gone. And she did not tell him she saw it, because some things a man must be let do without being watched. They did not wait to be surprised. That was Cottonwood's doing, and it was the moment she stopped being a stranger, sheltering at the man's water, and became the other half of the thing they were building. "You are thinking like a man who defends a spring," she told him, "how to hold the trail, how to win the fight when they come, but my grandmother did not keep the people alive through the bad years by winning fights. She kept them alive by making the fight not worth the fighting. Vane is not a brave man. Brave men do not hide behind bounty killers and thirsty cattle. His whole strength is that no one sees him, that he can starve out the small holders and take the water in the dark, and no one who matters ever knows or cares. So we do not fight his darkness with a rifle. We let in the light." And she laid it out, the plan she had turned in the long nights, and she watched something come into Rafe's face she had not seen there before, not surprise, but recognition, the look of a man realizing the woman at his fire had a mind on her like an owned blade. The spring's whole weakness, Vane thought, was that it had never been filed, a squatter's water, beyond the law's care. But Rafe knew a thing Vane did not. The spring lay on old ground. Before the Americans, before the territory, this had been Mexico, and the Mexicans before them had made grants, Mercedes, of land and water, written down, sealed, recorded in the church books and the old ayuntamiento records down in the border towns. And Rafe's mother's people and the Mexican families the Apache had sometimes raided and sometimes married and sometimes sheltered, remembered where the old grant lines ran. The spring, Ojo Verde, the green eye, it was called, in the old papers, sat inside a merced granted to a Mexican family 100 years before, a family gone now. But the paper was not gone. Paper does not die when families do. It only waits in the dark in some mission-strong box for someone to come asking. And the American law, whatever else it was, had promised, in the treaty that took the whole Southwest, to honor the old Spanish and Mexican grants. It broke that promise constantly in the dark for men like Vane. But not always, and a person with nothing left to lose, Cottonwood had learned, must become very good at finding the not always. So Rafe rode, not toward Vane, but away and around, 4 hard days, down to the border town, while Cottonwood kept the spring with the boy on watch and a rifle by the door. And he did the thing Vane could never have imagined a breed horse-catcher doing, because it meant walking back into the human world that had cast him out. He went to the old mission, to a priest so old he remembered the grants as living things, and together they went into the strong box and found it. The Merced, the green eye, the water named and bounded in a dead king's Spanish, and they had it copied, witnessed, and Rafe carried it to the federal land office in the town and filed on the surrounding ground in his own name as the grant's occupant and heir by possession, and paid the fee coin by coin and had it stamped, and left one copy and took another, so the record lived in two places and could not simply vanish the way inconvenient records vanished for men like Vane. And there was more. In the border town, Rafe found a thing he had not gone looking for. The old priest, when he understood the whole of it, a Warm Springs woman and 2 children run off the line, a bounty being paid on human beings, the Indian ring growing fat on rotten beef over the bodies of the penned. The old priest's face had gone hard and young with anger, and he had said, "There is a man."
A commissioner, an inspector, an honest one. They exist. They are rare as rain, but they exist. Sent out from the east because even in Washington the stink of what the rings are doing has finally carried. He is in the territory now.
He would give a great deal for a witness, for names, for a woman who can stand up and say what San Carlos is, what the water is, what the bounty is. And Rafe had thought of Cottonwood, who could not be made to bow at a ration line.
And had known she was that witness, if she chose to be, and had known too what it would cost her to stand up in the world of the men who had chained her husband onto a train and be seen. Vane came in the end, as they had known he would, but not 5 riders in the afternoon. He came in the gray before dawn with the bounty men, 4 of them, hard old scalp hunters with dead eyes, and with a paper of his own, a territorial warrant for renegade Apache, thinking to do it under color of law and find them asleep.
But the dog was awake, and the boy was awake, Chi, proud on the middle watch, and by the time they came through the cleft, Rafe stood in the mouth of the house with a rifle, and Cottonwood was above them in the rocks with another, where she could not be rushed, and the bounty men, who were killers but not fools, could see in the growing light that this would not be the easy dawn work they had been promised. The lead bounty man read the warrant. Rafe let him finish. Then he spoke, and his voice carried flat and cold off the canyon walls. "You can take that paper back to the man who bought it, and you can tell him some things. Tell him this water's filed, a Mexican Merced Ojo Verde, older than the territory, honored by the treaty, copied at the mission, and stamped at the land office, and a copy in my hand. He burns me out. He burns a federal filed grant, and there's a land office that'll know whose match it was. Tell him that." He let it sit. "Then tell him the harder thing. There's a federal inspector in this territory right now, an honest one, come out to cut the throat of the Indian ring. And he's got a witness now. A Warm Springs woman who's going to stand up in front of him and say what the beef contract is and what the bounty is and what men have been riding this basin collecting silver for human hair. Names. His name. Your names." He looked unhurried at each of the 4 dead-eyed men in turn. "You put us in the ground this morning. You don't stop that. It's already gone. The priest has it. The inspector has it. It's written down in 3 places you can't reach. All you do is add 4 more killings to a list a federal man is already reading. The country's changing, boys. You just haven't felt it yet. There's a day coming, and it's damn near here, when a man like Vane is more afraid of ink than he ever was of lead. And you're the fools he sent to stand out front of it holding the guns when it breaks." It was a strange kind of confrontation, and the strangeness was the whole of it. Vane had come prepared for a fight he could win or a bluff he could break. He was not prepared to be outflanked, to be told the battle had already been fought and lost days before, in a mission strongbox and a land office and an inspector's tent in ink where his guns could not reach. And the bounty men were killers for money, and money will not spend a man's own life against a fortified rifle above and a rifle below, and the promise that the killing buys them nothing but a place at the top of a federal list. One by one, Cottonwood watched them do the sum that such men do faster than any other, in the sum of leverage, and watched it come out for each of them wrong. The lead man folded the warrant and put it in his coat. "This ain't worth it," he said, to Vane more than to Rafe. "You never said nothing about no federal inspector. You find some other fool." And he turned his horse. Vane sat a long moment in the cold dawn, his pleasant face working, and Cottonwood watched him feel the whole structure of his power, the darkness he worked in, the fear he traded on, the certainty that no one who mattered would ever see. She watched him feel it shift under him and reverse. Then he wheeled his horse without a word and rode down into the shimmer, and there was nothing certain left in the way he rode. No shot had been fired. That was the victory, and it was Cottonwood's as much as Rafe's, and when the riders were gone, she came down out of the rocks and stood beside him at the mouth of the green canyon, their shoulders nearly touching, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all because the not losing was so large and so good that words would only have made it smaller. She did stand up later before the inspector. That is a story with its own weight, and it was the hardest thing she ever did, harder than the Malpais, to walk into a tent full of the men of the world that had chained her husband and to say, in a level voice that did not shake, "This is what you have made. This is hell's 40 acres. This is the Yellow River. This is the bounty on my children's hair. Write it down." And the inspector wrote it down, and it went east with the priest's letters and the copied grant and the names, and it became part of the slow, late, imperfect turning that would, in time, close some of the worst of it. Too late for so many. Too late for the man on the train, but not for everyone and not nothing, and bought partly with the courage of one woman who would not bow. But that is the story of what her standing did in the wide world. The story of what it did at the spring is smaller, and is this. She came back from the inspector's tent to green water and 2 safe children, and a man waiting at the cleft who had not been sure she would come back at all, and who, when he saw her, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 4 days. The rains came at last in the moon of thunder, the way they come to that country. Not gently, but all at once, in towers of blue-black cloud that stood up over the rim in the afternoons and walked across the basin, trailing gray skirts of water, and the dry washes ran red and roaring in an hour, and were dry again by morning. And the whole starved land went, in the space of 2 weeks, an impossible, violent green. The desert bloomed the way it only blooms after it has nearly killed everything on it, as though beauty were a thing it hoarded and spent only at the last. And the smell of wet creosote filled the green canyon, which is the smell of the desert, saying, "Not yet, not this year, we go on." Cottonwood had said, "In the killing dry, only until the rains." The rains came, and no one spoke of going. Instead they built. The grant was filed, and the water was theirs, and could not be taken, and a man could hold ground now with paper as well as with a rifle, and Rafe and the boy cut and hauled and raised a second room onto the house half built into the rock. So the children had a place of their own, and the raising of it was Chee's true coming of age, more than any horse or nod. The day he set a beam with his own strength, and Rafe said in front of his mother, "He's a better hand than most grown men I've hired." And the boy had to turn and study the far cliffs very hard so no one would see his face. She planted. In the wet red bottom below the spring she put in corn and beans and squash and the desert melons, and she taught the little girl the planting songs, the ones that thank the seed for agreeing to become food, and Dolly sang them in her high, clear warble, her namesake's voice come back to her whole, and Rafe, mending a hackamore nearby, listened without letting on that he listened. And the man changed most of all. Not suddenly, and not completely. He would always be a man with a canyon of dark in him, who needed the high silence and rode out alone sometimes to sit under the rim and be quiet. But the ghost went out of him by degrees over that green season. He spoke more. He laughed once or twice, a rusty, astonished sound, as though he'd found a tool he thought long lost. He began to tell the children things in the evenings, his mother's stories, the old ones, and the horse knowledge, and even, once, haltingly, the beginning of who his mother's people had been, so that the children took into themselves a piece of a broken thing and made it, in the way children do, unbroken again. And Cottonwood added the stories of her own Jirikiawa people, and the two ways of telling sat by the one fire and did not quarrel, and she thought, this too is being saved here, not only us, the stories. He led soldiers to a camp once and helped end a piece of the people, and now, at this water, he is handing the people back to two children who will carry them on. It does not undo the dawn. Nothing undoes the dawn. But it is also true, and it is happening, and a man is more than the worst hour of his life. He is what grows from it. He did a thing, late that summer, that told her more than any words. He took the boy far up onto the rim, to a place he had never taken anyone. And he showed him, Cottonwood learned this only after, the cold canyon, the one from the dawn. It could be seen from the rim, blue and far, a fold in the mountains 20 years and a whole life away. And Rafe told the boy the truth of what he had done there, all of it plain, sparing himself nothing, a grown man confessing his worst thing to a 10-year-old of the very people he had betrayed, because, he said, the boy would hear it someday from someone, the way you always do, and he would not have it be a stranger's telling. And because a boy who was going to learn everything else from him deserved to know exactly what kind of man he was learning it from, and to choose himself whether to keep learning. And the boy had been quiet a long time, looking at the far blue canyon. And then he had said, Rafe told this part to Cottonwood in the dark, his voice not steady. The boy had said, my grandmother told me a thing before she died. She said the Warm Springs people believe a man is given his worst day so that he will spend the rest of his life becoming someone who would never do it again. She said that is what a life is for. And then the boy had picked up the rope and said, show me the rest of the mare, and that had been the whole of the boy's judgment, and it was mercy past anything Rafe had ever thought to earn, and he had had to turn away on the rim so the boy would not see his face. It happened, in the end, over something small. That is how the largest things always happen. It was late in the green season, the light gone long and gold in the evenings, the corn tall in the red bottom, the far basins hazed with the good smoke of a country no longer burning but blooming. Dolly had climbed too high after a lizard and fallen, and gashed her arm badly on the rock, and she had screamed, and Rafe had reached her before her mother did, scooping her up in his enormous hands and holding her still, while Cottonwood cleaned the wound and bound it with the healing plants, and the child, in her hurt, without thinking, the way children say the truest things, had reached up and called him by the word that meant father, Esheta, the small word, the old word, the one she had not had a living mouth to say into in 3 long months. The green canyon went very still. Rafe did not say anything. He did not correct her. He only sat there with the small girl against his chest, and his hand, that great scarred hand that had held the horses on the rim above a dying camp, that had done the unforgivable thing, came up very slowly and rested on the child's dark head, as though it were the most fragile thing the world had ever made. And Cottonwood, kneeling with the healing plants still in her hands, looked up and found him looking at her over the child's head, and everything neither of them had said across a whole summer of silences was in that one look, and it did not need saying, and so it was not said. Later, when the children slept, they sat by the spring in the warm dark, with the whole enormous wheel of desert stars turning overhead, and for a while neither spoke. She didn't mean anything by it, Cottonwood said at last, offering him the way out, because offering people the way out was a habit of hers. Children say? I know what children say. A pause. The water made its small eternal sound. And I know what I'd want them to be able to say. Their father, He stopped and found the words one at a time in the dark, like stones for a river crossing. He's alive, somewhere east in the wet. He's their father, and he always will be. And if the world ever turns far enough that he can come back to this country, then he comes here to this water. And there's a place for him, and I'll shake his hand and thank him for these two and step back and mean every part of it. I'm not asking to take anything of his. I know to the bone what it is to have a thing taken. He was quiet. I'm only saying there's room here at this water for him in the stories and for me in the days and for... The last word came hardest of anything she had ever heard him say. Us, if you want it, and if you don't, that's a whole thing too, and you'll have this water as long as it runs, you and them, and I'll not say another word. It was, she thought, the longest string of words she had ever heard him put together, and everyone had cost him, and that was how she knew. She did not answer with a word. She reached across the small, dark distance and put her hand over his, over that great scarred hand, and she felt it turn under hers and close around it, careful, as though her hand were a thing that could break, as though it were the most precious thing he had held in a very long time. They were not, even then, a perfect happiness, and she made herself be honest about that in the dark. There would be hard years still, dry ones, when even the spring ran low, the long shadow of the agency and the ring and the bounty and the whole narrowing world would reach even up under the rim. And her husband was still 1,000 miles east in the drowning green, and grief for him would live in her always, in a room she visited and did not live in. The old free life was gone off the earth, and no water and no love could bring it back, nor the dead of the cold canyon, nor the dead of the yellow river. Grief does not end. It only makes room, if you let it, for other things to grow up alongside it, the way the desert throws its violent flowers out of ground that a month before was only killing dust. But they had made a family out of strangers, out of thirst and guilt, and one Apache lullaby sung badly in the dark. And a family, she had come to understand, was not only the thing you were born into and could lose. It was also the thing you chose over and over in the dry to keep alive, the choice you made each morning when you carried the water. It was a spring you tended precisely because you knew better than anyone how a country could go to bone, and how rare, how holy, how worth defending was a green place in the middle of it. The stars turned overhead, the same stars that had looked down so indifferently on her a lifetime ago on the flat, when she knelt on the warm, dead ground and swore to a man on a train that she would keep the children alive and did not know how. They did not seem indifferent now, or perhaps they were exactly as indifferent as they had always been, and the only thing that had changed was her. A woman sitting by living water with her hand in a good man's hard hand, her children safe and watered and sleeping, the corn standing tall in red ground she had broken with her own 2 hands, in a country that had tried its level best to kill them all, and had not, in the end, quite managed it. Either way, she thought, it was enough. It was more than enough. Against all the cold arithmetic of that country and that age, it was a life, earned, imperfect, bought too dear, and quietly, stubbornly, going on. Somewhere out in the blooming dark a coyote called, and another answered, and the old dog lifted its head at the water's edge and listened, and finding all well, lay back down. And it was well. For now, in the small green place they had made against the enormous dry, it was well.